He laughed as the ice water splashed against my face, the glass slipping from his hand and crashing on the floor like it was scripted. It echoed in the silence of the party, my humiliation soaked in the laughter of his friends. He called me a maid. And I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. That's the moment he thought he won. That's the moment I decided to destroy him without ever raising my voice. And when I did, he wasn't laughing anymore. The beginning wasn't cruel. That's the tragedy. If it had started with cruelty, maybe I would have left long ago. Maybe I wouldn't have stayed long enough to forget who I was, or how strong I could be. But Ethan Connors had a charm so clean, so polished, it almost looked like kindness. He knew how to play the long game, how to take over a woman's world one soft smile and business plan at a time. I met Ethan when I was 24. I was still a junior executive at Whitestone Capital, quiet and focused, working late nights, always trying to prove I belonged in rooms full of men who didn't even remember my name. He did. He remembered the way I took notes in meetings, the way I didn't flinch under pressure, and the exact day I switched from flats to heels. That kind of observation felt like attention. We married 3 years later. Not because I was in a rush, but because he made me believe we were building something bigger than ourselves. He always spoke in we. We'll own something someday, Ava. We'll have a boardroom with our names on the glass. What he meant was he'd have the glass. I'd polish it. Till I bought in. Literally. When Ethan started his own tech consulting firm, I cashed out most of my stock options to fund the seed investment. I even negotiated my way into 40% equity. He didn't fight me on it at first. "You're my wife," he said. "What's mine is yours." But over time I watched that smile of his grow thinner, harder. He stopped using the word we. It started small. He stopped introducing me at networking events. Clients assumed I was the assistant. He never corrected them. Then came the travel, too stressful for me to tag along. The pitch meetings I'd helped craft, he attended them alone. The emails he replied to without CCing me. The accounts that got moved from joint to personal without my knowledge. I stayed quiet. I told myself the business needed a face and Ethan had a face people trusted. I told myself I was tired, not sidelined. That I had power, just not the kind that made noise. But then came the night that burned through all the lies. It was a Friday in early December. Cold enough to numb skin but not memory. We were hosting a party at the Hollow, a members-only club he'd recently joined, his new playground for handshakes and secrets. The guest list was elite, venture capitalists, CEOs, former politicians with fake smiles and real agendas. And their wives. Always the wives, decorated like trophies, polished and polite. I wore a black satin dress that hugged my waist and pooled at my ankles. My hair was swept back into a knot. Simple. Elegant. I remember fixing Ethan's cufflinks before the first guest arrived, the ones I gifted him on our 5th anniversary. He didn't notice. The night unfolded like clockwork. Waiters floated through the crowd with champagne and miniature dishes on silver trays. Laughter mingled with clinking glasses. Ethan was magnetic, of course. He moved from group to group like a king, like he owned the room. And technically he did. Then it happened. A woman, young blonde with a dress too tight and a laugh too loud, brushed her fingers against Ethan's shoulder. Her name was Danny. I recognized her from a previous event. He was always too familiar. But this time she leaned in close, whispered something that made Ethan throw his head back and laugh. That laugh. It wasn't his usual one. It was hollow. Ugly. I walked up quietly, my voice calm. "Ethan, the vanguards are asking for you at the South Terrace." He didn't even look at me. "Handle it, Ethan." And that's when he turned. That's when the glass, cold, sweating, filled with melting ice, was flung at my face. Not tossed. Thrown. The water slapped my skin like a slap of disrespect, and the room gasped in perfect silence. For a second it felt like time held its breath. The sting was real. But it wasn't from the water. He smirked. "If you're so desperate to serve, at least play the maid right." There was laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make the moment unforgettable. I stood there soaked, humiliated and frozen. And then I smiled. Not a loud, confrontational smile. Not a bitter, broken one. Just a quiet, terrifying calm. The kind of smile that says, "You just made the worst mistake of your life." He thought he embarrassed me. He thought I would cry or leave in shame. That's the thing about people like Ethan. They never believe their victims are capable of war. I didn't leave the party early. I stayed. I finished the conversations he should have taken. I shook hands with men who watched my dress stick to my legs in cold water and dared them to look away. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. Then I went home. Alone. That night I didn't sleep. I started making lists. Asset lists. Passwords. Access points. Ownership structures. Staff rosters. Vendor contacts. I wasn't just his wife. I'd helped him build the foundation. I knew where the rot was buried. I made another list. Of allies. People who owed me favors. People who hated Ethan silently. People who wouldn't question my call. And I planned. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to vanish from his world, while ripping the floor from under his feet. I didn't pack much. Just 2 suitcases. The rest I left behind. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because none of it belonged to me anymore. Not the designer heels chosen for his parties. Not the perfume he complimented in front of strangers. Not the mirror I once stood in front of, wondering what more I had to become to be enough. I walked out of that penthouse the same night the water hit my face. He was still inside, drinking, laughing, unaware that everything had changed. That a quiet war had just begun. And I would fight it from a place he couldn't touch. I moved into a furnished apartment downtown. A clean, minimal space with floor-to-ceiling windows and 0 photographs on the walls. No memories. No weight. Just silence. The building overlooked the financial district where he built his empire. I could see the lights of Connor's Tech from my balcony, a distant tower of glass and illusion. But now I wasn't inside it. I wasn't in the shadows. I was the one watching. And from here I began. The first move wasn't flashy. It was the quiet restoration of Mercer and Company, the consulting firm I registered years ago and abandoned when I let Ethan's dreams swallow mine. I reactivated the domain. Rebranded the website. Clean. Thick. Untraceable. No photos of me. No links to my past. Just services that looked tailor-made for companies looking to stabilize after failing with bigger fish. A week later I hired 2 people. Not employees, allies. Claire Sampson, ex-Connor's tech marketing strategist, fired during a sudden restructure. She was sharp, loyal, and still carried the sting of being discarded after 5 years of service. And Devin Gray, former compliance officer, let go without severance for flagging internal billing irregularities Ethan didn't want exposed. They weren't just workers. They were instruments. And they didn't ask questions when I told them our first goal. Bleed Connor's Tech quietly. Step 2 was leverage. I still owned 40% of Connor's Tech. That made me silent royalty, not a ghost. My name was on every agreement. I had access, buried but legal. All I had to do was dig. Chris Ingwin, the company's CFO, had been with us from the beginning. A numbers man with loyalty not to people but to data. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. I sent him a message through a secure channel. No signature. Just a time and a location. He showed up 10 minutes early. "You're not wasting time," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've wasted enough of it already." He studied me. "You look different." "I am." There was a beat. Then, "What do you want?" "Access," I said. "Discreet. No red flags. You'll get a cut of every client I pull from the wreckage." He didn't ask why. Well, Chris always knew Ethan was smoke and mirrors. Now I was giving him a reason to flip the switch. Within 48 hours I had read-only backend access to the financial dashboards, CRM systems, staff turnover logs and vendor contracts. And what I found was everything I suspected, and worse. Clients were leaving. Quietly. Slipping out without protest. Vendor costs were bloated. Staff morale had cratered. Ethan was holding it all together with personal credit lines and ego. The empire was brittle. I smiled. Step 3 was whispers. You see, people don't trust explosions. They trust rumors. And I had them delivered exactly where I wanted them, through hushed conversations in investor lounges and polite cocktails in silent corners of events where Connor's Tech was once welcome. I didn't go myself. I sent Claire. She was perfect for it. A former insider with just enough bitterness to make it believable, but not so much to seem vindictive. She told them Ava Mercer had returned. Quietly. Powerfully. She didn't name Mercer and Company. But she didn't have to. Within a week we poached our first client. Then another. Then 2 more. All of them former Connor's tech clients. Each lost without Ethan realizing it, until the invoices stopped arriving. He tried to call me once. Blocked number. No voicemail. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. I wasn't angry anymore. I was strategic. And when revenge comes without emotion, it cuts deepest. Because it means you're not doing it to hurt someone. You're doing it to make sure they never stand again. Ethan always walked like the floor beneath him belonged to him. Until the day he noticed it was shifting. The first sign was when Global Verge, a high-profile client Connor's tech had courted for months, went radio silent after promising to renew their $1 million contract. Ethan called their CEO directly. No answer. He sent flowers to their headquarters. Still nothing. When their press release dropped, he read it 3 times. Global Verge welcomes Mercer & Company as our new strategic advisory firm. His face turned pale. He tried to search the company. No names. No contact numbers. No board profiles. Just a steel gray website with abstract language and an impressive client list forming in the shadows. He threw his phone across the office. That same day his assistant resigned. No warning. Just a white envelope and a final email that read, "I'm tired of being told to fix what you keep breaking." Ethan blamed burnout. Or sabotage. But the truth was simpler. People were no longer afraid of leaving him. They were afraid of staying. By the time the second resignation came, his junior VP, he started to panic. He doubled down. More hours. Emergency meetings. A brand refresh campaign with a consulting firm that charged too much and delivered too little. So the rot spread. And still he didn't know where it was coming from. I watched from a distance. Not as his wife. But as the woman holding the string pulling his whole world apart. I still hadn't spoken to him since the night I walked out. He didn't know where I lived. Where I worked. What I looked like without him. He didn't even know I'd already bought out 2 of his minor shareholders using shell LLCs tied to Mercer & Company. I was building a quiet majority. And he couldn't stop me because he didn't know it was me. One Thursday morning I received an alert through the back-end system Chris had given me access to. Ethan was scheduling a board meeting. Private. Emergency. Topic: seeking immediate external capital for stabilization. I knew exactly what that meant. He wanted to sell shares. Dilute my ownership. Invite new investors under the guise of rescue. I let him plan it. I let him pick the time. Then I showed up. I walked into the Connor's Tech boardroom like I owned it, because I still did. Silence fell as I entered. Ethan's face froze. He stood up halfway, eyes narrowed. "You're not on this call," he said. "I'm not a guest," I replied. "I'm 40% of this room." One of the older investors chuckled behind his hand. Ethan clenched his jaw. "We're in crisis. This isn't the time to." "This is exactly the time," I said, opening a leather folder and sliding it across the table. Clause 9, subsection B. Any external investor proposal that dilutes a primary stakeholder's holdings by more than 10% requires unanimous consent. You don't have it. You're bluffing. Am I? I asked, sliding a second sheet across the table. These 2 shareholders recently sold their equity positions. To my company. Which means I now hold 52%. He went still. Effective immediately, I continued. I'm calling for an audit of all financial decisions made in the past 12 months. And a vote to freeze executive spending. Ethan's mouth opened but no sound came out. I suggest you take a walk, I said. Or better yet, take a leave. The room stayed quiet. No one came to his defense. He left. Not with a bang. But like a man who just realized the floor beneath him was never his. That evening he showed up at my apartment. Not because I gave him the address. Because desperation makes men dig deeper than they should. I didn't open the door. I watched him through the peephole, disheveled, hair uncombed, face pale. He knocked once. Then twice. Then leaned against the door and said softly, "You planned this." I stayed silent. "I thought you were broken," he whispered. "But you were just silent." So I said nothing. He finally walked away. And I exhaled. Not in relief. But finality. The war was almost over. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I hadn't thrown a single glass. But I'd taken everything. And now I was preparing to take his name next. The first time Ethan's name trended online, It wasn't for his tech achievements or the Forbes 30 under 30 list he used to brag about at every dinner party. It was for something more dangerous. Whispers of financial mismanagement. Internal staff leaks. A viral screenshot of an email chain that exposed how Connor's Tech used offshore consultants to inflate early-stage valuations. It didn't take long for people to start asking the right questions. And not long after that, Ethan stopped smiling in public. I didn't release the emails. I didn't have to. Once I pulled the right thread, the whole tapestry started to fray on its own. The email leak came from a former Connor's Tech data analyst who'd left after Ethan accused him of creating internal friction. That friction? A warning flag about falsified timelines on project rollouts. Ethan silenced it with an NDA and a threat. But that NDA didn't stop him from forwarding those emails, anonymously, to 3 tech journalists who'd been sniffing around Connor's Tech for months. 2 days after the story broke, Ava Mercer, me, was invited to speak on a discreet panel at a private business summit in Chicago. Subject: Corporate Power Dynamics, When Silent Partners Strike. I declined the invitation. Let the silence speak louder. Let the public speculate. Let Ethan squirm. At Connor's Tech, the walls began to sweat. The board, once too afraid to question Ethan's decisions, now met without him. Investors began to circle like sharks, looking for a way to offload their shares before the entire ship sank. In the middle of it all, Ethan tried to hold on to his narrative. He called emergency meetings, spoke to media outlets with false confidence, blamed the leaks on disgruntled former employees. But none of it worked. Because behind every whisper, every missed deadline, every drop in share value, there was a woman Ethan used to call emotional. Now I was untouchable. Now I was inevitable. From my office in the Mercer and Company suite, top floor corner view, I watched the fallout like a queen watching an enemy kingdom burn. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet. There was still one piece left to take. His name. The final phase began with a shareholder motion. Filed discreetly, it called for the removal of Ethan Connors as CEO of Connor's Tech on the basis of fiduciary failure, reputation damage, and financial endangerment of the company's future. It needed a majority vote. I already had 52%. But I didn't want it to look like a coup. I wanted it to look like justice. So I started calling the others. Investors who once sat on the fence. Former allies who were slowly going cold on Ethan's leadership. I didn't threaten them. I just showed them the numbers. Revenue loss. Client churn. Internal resignations. Bad PR. And then I showed them what was possible. A restructure. A new board. A quiet merge between Connor's Tech and Mercer and Company, under a new name. Mercer Dynamics. No more Ethan. No more Connors. Just power rebranded and reborn. It took 10 days to secure the votes. Chris Ingwin cast his with a shrug and a whispered. He never listened anyway. Ryan, Ethan's brother who now held 5%, sent a simple text. Burn him down. One by one the others followed. When I walked into the boardroom to officially cast the final vote, the atmosphere was different. No hostility. No tension. Just silence. Like a verdict already delivered. Ethan wasn't there yet. He arrived 10 minutes late again, out of habit not confidence. His suit was still perfect. His face still clean-shaven. But he looked tired. Smaller. Not physically. But in energy. In presence. He looked like a man who'd finally started to suspect that everything around him had been poisoned long ago. I didn't rise to greet him. No one did. He sat down slowly, looked around the table, then fixed his eyes on me. I assume this is your doing, he said. I didn't answer. Chris cleared his throat. The motion has been circulated and seconded. We'll proceed to a final vote. Ethan scoffed. You all want to gut the company because of bad headlines? Because a few bitter interns cried to the press? He turned to me. Or is it because my wife couldn't handle a little public embarrassment? I leaned back in my chair. Measured. I left you everything you needed to succeed, I said. My connections. My contracts. My brain. I paused. And you traded it for a glass of water and applause. His jaw clenched. You think you've won? He hissed. I raised an eyebrow. No, Ethan. I haven't even started. The vote proceeded. And in less than 5 minutes, the man who once mocked me in front of strangers was officially removed from his throne. He didn't speak as he left. He didn't even look back. Just walked out like a ghost, forgotten before the door shut behind him. The press release went live the next morning. Connors Tech confirms CEO departure, strategic merger with Mercer and Company underway. The story trended for days. Not because people were surprised, but because they weren't. Because the cracks had been visible for a while. All I did was split them wide open. Publicly, I remained quiet. No statements. No interviews. Privately, I received over 24 congratulatory messages. From former clients. From silent partners. From women in business who'd been watching me for years, waiting for the moment I stopped standing behind a man and stepped into the light. And still I didn't gloat. Because I wasn't done. 3 days after his removal, Ethan tried to call me. Walked. He sent an email. Subject line, one conversation. I didn't reply. Instead I called his mother. As his mother. She'd always liked me. Quietly. The kind of woman who watched her sons rise with pride but often offered me tea in the kitchen and said things like, "You've got more spine than he deserves." I told her the truth. Everything. The humiliation. The silence. The revenge. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "You were right to disappear." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted him accountable. She sighed. He never understood the difference. Meanwhile, Ethan had no job. No investors. No friends. He moved into a rented apartment, half the size, none of the glory. His inner circle shrank. His inbox dried up. Even his social media presence, once curated and flashy, fell silent. And yet, I knew that wouldn't be the worst part for him. The worst part was that I never raised my voice. I never screamed. I never slandered him. The world turned against him not because of what I said, but because of what he did. He did it to himself. All I did was let the world see. Then I made my final move. I walked into the last meeting as Ava Mercer, acting CEO of Mercer Dynamics. I stood in front of a panel of executives, some old, some new, and laid out the future. Our future. A restructuring plan that blended the best of Connors Tech's infrastructure with Mercer and Company's new age consultancy model. Streamlined, data-driven, reputation-safe. They listened. And they approved. The company was mine now. Completely. In name. In value. In legacy. But I didn't rename it after me out of vanity. I did it because I wanted every mention of Mercer Dynamics to remind him, daily, quietly, that the woman he laughed at in front of his peers now owned everything he once used to define himself. And she did it without ever raising her voice. I never filed for divorce. I didn't need to. Let him file. Let him stare at those papers knowing he had no leverage left. Let him walk into a courtroom with empty hands and a name no longer worth defending. I had already taken everything that mattered. And I hadn't shed a single tear. On the 1-year anniversary of the infamous party, I attended a gala. Same venue. Same event. Same crowd. But this time I wasn't beside a man. I walked in alone. Heads turned. Photographers paused. A few journalists whispered. I didn't wear black. I wore crimson. Structured. Confident. The same color as the blood I metaphorically spilled all year. And at the center of the room, standing alone, was Ethan. Smaller. Duller. Just a man now. I didn't walk over. He saw me. And for the first time, he looked away. That was the real victory. Not the money. Not the company. Not the power. But the moment he realized I had become untouchable. Not because I made noise. But because I didn't. The headlines faded. The company stabilized. The name Mercer Dynamics replaced Connors Tech on press releases, conference stages and client contracts. Our new logo, sharp, minimalist, silver against deep indigo, appeared in boardrooms and investor decks, no longer as a rival but as an authority. Silence returned. Not the silence of helplessness but the stillness of power. I had everything. But I still hadn't looked back. Not once. Not yet. Until the letter arrived. A thick envelope. Cream-colored. No return address. Inside, a folded note in Ethan's handwriting. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. Meet me or everything we built goes with me. A threat. A cry for attention. The last act of a man who hadn't accepted that the show was over. I placed the note on my desk and stared at it until the light faded from my office windows. Then I called my attorney. Draft an emergency injunction, I said. Freeze any remaining assets tied to Ethan Connors. I want every loophole closed. Every legal line drawn. She didn't ask why. Just said, on it. Because that's how I moved now. Quietly. Fast. Final. Still, something about the note scratched at me. Not fear. Not regret. Just the sense that the final thread hadn't been clipped. Not fully. He asked to meet at the private garden at Marlowe Estate, a venue known for its discretion where media and staff were not allowed. I agreed, but under one condition. Public place. 1 hour. No lawyers. No recordings. No second chances. He accepted. I arrived 10 minutes early. He was already there. Not in a tailored suit this time, but in something cheaper. A black button-down that hung a little loose, sleeves rolled like he thought it would make him seem more casual. More human. But the arrogance was still there, in the tilt of his chin, the way his fingers tapped the iron bench like he was timing my breath. I didn't sit. I have nothing left to say, I said. So whatever you think you're holding over me, let's get it over with. He smiled, but it was brittle. You look different. You look the same, I said. Still pretending you haven't lost. His smile faded. You made your point, he muttered. You won. No, I corrected. I survived. You lost. That's different. He stared at me for a long moment. Then his voice dipped. I never thought you'd actually do it. I raised an eyebrow. Destroy you. He flinched at the word. You never raised your voice, he murmured. Not once. That's what killed me. I didn't need to, I said. You screamed loud enough for both of us your entire life. He shook his head slowly. We had something once. Don't pretend we didn't. I'm not pretending anything, I replied. We did have something. Then you shattered it like a glass of water in front of strangers. He looked down. I wanted to punish you, he said, barely audible. That night. For what? I asked. For becoming stronger than me, he whispered. I didn't answer. Because deep down I had always known. He wasn't afraid of my weakness. He was afraid of my potential. The way I made people listen in meetings. The way clients followed me. The way his name meant nothing without mine beside it. He was afraid of being irrelevant in the shadow of someone he swore was beneath him. And when he couldn't contain me, he tried to crush me. With a laugh. And water. In front of his friends. I watched him now, hollow, thinner, jittery fingers twitching on the bench. There was no threat left in him. Just the desperate hunger for relevance. I still have access to your early shareholder agreements, he said quietly. To your original consulting documents. Things Mercer and Company might not want leaked. I stared at him. I know how your company started, he continued. You moved money under holding names. You bought shares through shells. I could make it look unethical. You could try, I said, tone even. He looked up. But if you do, I'll release a recording, I continued, pulling my phone from my pocket. One you forgot existed. His eyes sharpened. What recording? You were drunk. It was 3 years ago. You called me your company's housemaid. Said you'd sink the whole ship before giving me credit. Claire pulled the audio from your smart home speaker before she was fired. It's still encrypted. Still admissible. He went pale. You've already lost your board, your investors, and your family, I said. You're one headline away from never working in this industry again. So if you want to throw your final match onto this powder keg, go ahead. I stepped closer. But know this, if you strike, I burn. His mouth parted slightly. Then closed. He sank back onto the bench, shoulders folding like wet paper. What do you want from me? He asked, voice hollow. Nothing, I said. That's the point. He blinked. Then why are you here? Because I needed to look you in the eyes, I said, and see what I already knew. And what's that? That I didn't just take everything you had. I leaned down. I took everything you were. Then I walked away. And this time he didn't follow. That night I returned to my apartment. The one with no shared memories. No silent ghosts. I poured myself a glass of red wine, not to celebrate but to mark the ending. Because that's what it was now. A full stop. A final chapter. Not the end of Ethan's fall, but the end of my need to watch it. The following month, Mercer Dynamics hosted its first executive summit. 200 guests. 45 companies. One headline speaker, Ava Mercer. I wore white. Stood alone on the stage. No introductions. No need. When the applause settled, I said only this. Power is not the loudest voice in the room. It's the one people listen to when the noise stops. And they listened. Weeks later, I received a message from Claire. Just a link. I clicked it. A podcast interview. The host introduced their surprise guest. Former CEO of Connors Tech Ethan Connors has agreed to break his silence. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. There was nothing in that interview I hadn't already predicted. Excuses. Deflection. Maybe an attempt at reinvention. I closed the link. Let the world hear his version. I had no need to defend mine. My version had already become the company, the brand, the future. There's a quote I once read. Revenge is the empty room where you expected an apology. I used to believe that. But now I knew better. Revenge wasn't empty. It was deliberate. It was quiet. It was precise. And when done right, it didn't leave a room empty. It left it clean. The last time I heard Ethan's name, it was in a passing remark. 2 junior analysts whispering outside my office. Wasn't he the guy who got taken down by his own wife? No, the other corrected. She didn't take him down. She replaced him. I smiled to myself. They weren't talking about the man anymore. They were talking about me. The first time I walked through the doors of Mercer Dynamics after the merger was finalized, the walls still smelled like Connors Tech. Faint cologne, synthetic gloss, desperation in the paint. It clung to the conference rooms, the leftover architecture of an ego that once towered over this empire. But slowly I peeled it away. Strip by strip. Nameplate by nameplate. Until the walls finally exhaled. We didn't just rebrand. We rebirthed. And what emerged from those ashes wasn't a woman scorned, or a CEO with something to prove. It was me. Not the wife. Not the maid. Not the silent investor who once flinched when her name was left off an email. I was the face. The signature. The final say. And no one could take it from me. Because I didn't inherit this. I took it. Still, victory doesn't come without echoes. Sometimes I'd catch a whisper of his name in industry talk. A LinkedIn post here. A coffee rumor there. Once, I passed a former executive from Connors Tech at a summit. She froze, unsure whether to nod or walk faster. I nodded. She exhaled. And I understood. Some people were never sure which side of history they'd land on. Until the dust settled. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her. Not at any of them. Because they weren't the enemy. He was. And even he was no longer a threat. Just a reminder. A scar that no longer hurt. 2 months after the summit, I received a package. No return label. Just a black box wrapped in crimson ribbon. Inside, a single object. The cufflinks I gave Ethan on our anniversary. The same ones I used to fix at galas when I still thought love was something you could wear like armor. A note was tucked beneath. Read. I won't ask for forgiveness. You already gave me justice. I didn't know if he meant it. But I didn't need to. Forgiveness was no longer a currency I spent. I put the cufflinks in a drawer. Not as a keepsake. As a reminder. That even the most polished things break. The next board meeting was different. New faces. Younger voices. More women at the table. More vision in the air. We no longer chased clients. They came to us. Because trust had become our loudest advertisement. Because the woman they once overlooked had now become their compass. At the end of that meeting, one of our youngest department heads approached me. She was barely 30, sharp as a diamond, and brave enough to ask what others only wondered. How did you do it? She asked. How did you survive that? I looked at her, really looked. Saw the way her shoulders braced for the answer. For strategy. For secrets. But I gave her something else. I didn't survive it, I said. I outgrew it. That's the part people never understand about revenge. It's not about burning your enemy's house down. It's about building something so massive, so undeniable, that your enemy becomes too small to matter. In time the anger faded. Not all at once. But like slow leaves falling in autumn, one thought at a time. I stopped replaying the night of the glass. Stopped imagining alternate versions of the moment. Stopped wondering if I should have screamed. Because I realized, silence had been my sharpest blade. He laughed. And I didn't cry. That was the first blow. The rest? That was justice. Not loud. Not televised. But complete. A year passed. Then another. Then Mercer Dynamics was ranked among the top 10 fastest growing strategic firms in North America. I was on the cover. Not in the background. Front and center. Red suit. No smile. Not because I wasn't proud. But because I didn't owe the world one. They'd seen enough smiles from women who had to fight too hard for too little. Let them see what happened when we stopped asking for permission. One night I was invited to a panel in San Francisco. Subject: Women who built without help. I said yes. Not for the title. But for the room. It was a small venue. Dimmed lights. No press. Just voices that mattered. During the Q&A someone asked me, "What would you tell the version of yourself who stood there, soaked in water in front of all those people?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought of that night. Of the cold. Of the way my dress clung to my skin. Of how his friends laughed. Of how not a single person stepped between us. I remembered how I didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't leave in rage. Only silence. I looked out at the audience. At the women watching. And said, I'd tell her she just became invincible. The room fell still. Then they stood. All of them. And I realized, this wasn't just my story. This was theirs too. The last time I saw Ethan was 2 years later. An art gala. I didn't know he'd be there. He was standing near the sculptures holding a glass he didn't sip from. He looked older. Not aged but tired. That exhaustion you carry in your bones when you realize the best parts of your life already happened, and you weren't even decent enough to appreciate them. Our eyes met. Only briefly. He gave a small nod. I didn't return it. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. Because I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his regret. I had my name. I had my company. I had myself. And for the first time that was enough. Later that night I walked along the waterfront alone. The sky was heavy with stars, the kind of night that makes you think back. Not with longing but with understanding. It had taken everything in me to survive him. To plan. To execute. To take it all back piece by piece. And yet, the real triumph wasn't the empire I rebuilt. It was the woman I became in its ruins. The woman who didn't ask for a second chance. Who made her own. The woman who wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. She was the view. And she'd never disappear again. Vendi.